The clock is ticking on the release of the DOJ's files on convicted pedophile and former friend of Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, after Trump announced that he had signed the bill late last night on social media, writing this, quote, "This latest hoax will backfire on the Democrats just as all of the rest have. Thank you for your attention to this matter." The bill orders that the files be released within the next 30 days, although the precise timing of that release still unclear, as is whether the Trump administration will attempt to withhold them. As the New York Times notes, quote, "Mr. Trump's signature does not guarantee the release of all the files. The bill contains significant exceptions, including a provision protecting continuing investigations, which could mean many documents would stay confidential." In a statement, the family of Virginia Giuffre wrote this, quote, "This work is not finished. Every name must be revealed, regardless of power, wealth, or party affiliation. For Virginia, her sisters, and survivors across the world, this is a momentous step towards a long overdue justice."
All right, so let me tell you what just happened, because if you're not paying attention to this story, you really need to start. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, is in serious trouble. And I mean serious trouble. We're not talking about some political controversy here. We're not talking about Democrats complaining about her policies. We're talking about federal judges, multiple federal judges, calling out her conduct in open court. We're talking about rulings that expose potential evidence tampering. We're talking about a situation where legal experts are now openly discussing whether the nation's top law enforcement officer could face criminal liability. Prison is now on the table. Let me say that again, so it really sinks in. Prison is now on the table for the Attorney General of the United States. Come on, can you believe this? This is wild. This is absolutely wild. The person who is supposed to be enforcing the law in this country is now facing questions about whether she broke the law herself, and not just any laws. We're talking about obstruction. We're talking about evidence removal. We're talking about using illegally appointed prosecutors to go after Trump's political enemies. This is the kind of stuff that ends careers. This is the kind of stuff that ends with people in handcuffs. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
This is big. We have learned that the Justice Department's case against former FBI Director Jim Comey and the New York Attorney General have both been dismissed. CNN's Caitlin Polance is covering this. Caitlin, okay, what happened here? I don't know which case you want to take first.
Well, they both are being dismissed, and for essentially the same reason that Lindsay Halligan, the Eastern District of Virginia interim U.S. attorney sent there by Donald Trump, not Senate confirmed, that she doesn't have the power. What the judge here has found, this is Judge Cameron Curry from South Carolina. She came into the district, heard arguments from both of the lawyers on these cases against Lindsay Halligan's role. They argued that she didn't have the power because she wasn't Senate confirmed, and thus these indictments are invalid. The judge is agreeing with that. Judge Curry is saying that the Attorney General's attempt to install Ms. Halligan as interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia was invalid.
So what exactly happened? Let me break it down for you. On November 25th, 2025, just yesterday, Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered the Justice Department to fast-track the processing of records related to how Bondi handled the Jeffrey Epstein files. Yeah, Epstein, that Epstein, the billionaire pedophile who somehow managed to die in federal custody under mysterious circumstances. The guy whose client list has been the subject of speculation for years. The guy who partied with some of the most powerful people in the world. Those files. And Judge Chutkan isn't messing around. She explicitly cited public concern that the DOJ reverse course on releasing these documents after Bondi reportedly told Trump that his name appeared in the files. Let that sink in for a second. The Attorney General of the United States allegedly told the president that his name was in the Epstein files, and then the DOJ suddenly decided not to release those documents. Are you kidding me? If that's true, and the federal judge thinks there's enough concern here to order expedited processing, then we're looking at a potential cover-up at the highest levels of government. We're looking at the Attorney General potentially hiding evidence to protect the president. That's not politics. That's obstruction of justice. That's a crime. But wait, it gets worse. Because this isn't the only problem Bondi is facing right now. Just the day before November 24th, another federal judge dropped a bombshell ruling that makes Bondi look even worse. Judge Cameron McGowan Curry dismissed the criminal cases against James Comey and Letitia James. Now, if you've been following the news, you know that Trump's DOJ went after these two with everything they had. Comey, the former FBI director who Trump has hated ever since the Russia investigation, and Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who has been going after Trump's business empire in civil court. Trump wanted revenge, and Bondi's DOJ was happy to deliver. They indicted both of them on criminal charges. It looked like Trump was finally getting his payback. But then Judge Curry looked at how these cases were brought, and she was not happy. She ruled that the prosecutor who secured these indictments, a woman named Lindsay Halligan, was illegally appointed, not improperly appointed, not questionably appointed, illegally appointed. The judge said that allowing this kind of after-the-fact ratification of an illegal appointment would mean that any private citizen could be used to secure indictments. That's insane. That's the DOJ basically making up the rules as they go along to target people the president doesn't like. And here's the thing. These rulings aren't happening in isolation. Legal analysts and watchdog groups are connecting the dots. They're seeing a pattern. Bondi's DOJ isn't just aggressive, it's potentially criminal in how it's operating. The FOIA case about the Epstein files, the illegal appointment of prosecutors, the targeting of Trump's political enemies, the secrecy around evidence. It all adds up to something that looks a lot like obstruction and abuse of power. And now federal judges are calling it out publicly. They're putting it on the record. They're creating a paper trail that could lead to contempt findings, ethics referrals, maybe even a special counsel investigation, maybe even criminal charges against Bondi herself. So yeah, prison is on the table. Not confirmed, not certain, but absolutely on the table, in a way it wasn't a week ago. Because when federal judges start using words like illegally appointed and start ordering expedited processing of evidence related to potential cover-ups, that's when you know things are getting serious. That's when you know the walls are closing in. Pam Bondi is trapped, and she might not be able to get out of this one. Stick with me, because this story goes way deeper than you might think. Okay, so let's really dig into this, because there are layers here that most people aren't seeing. The media is covering these rulings as separate stories. Oh, there's the Epstein FOIA thing, and over here there's the Comey and Letitia James dismissal. But when you put them together, when you see the full picture, it becomes clear that Pam Bondi is facing a systemic crisis. Multiple federal judges are now questioning the basic legality of how she's running the Department of Justice. And that's not a political problem. That's an existential legal problem. Let me start with the Epstein situation, because this is the one that could really blow up. For years, literally years, people have been demanding the release of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein and his network. Who was involved? Who visited his island? Who was in his little black book? These questions have haunted the public imagination ever since Epstein died in that jail cell. And there have been all kinds of promises about transparency, all kinds of statements about releasing the files. But somehow, the full truth never quite comes out. There's always another delay, always another excuse, always another reason why the public can't see what's really in those documents. And now we're learning that Pam Bondi might be at the center of the latest cover-up. Here's what we know. The DOJ was apparently moving toward releasing certain Epstein-related documents. This was going to be a big deal. Finally, some transparency. Finally, some answers. But then something changed. According to reports that have concerned Judge Chutkan enough to order expedited processing, Bondi allegedly told Trump that his name appeared in the Epstein files. And after that conversation, after the president learned that his name was in there, the DOJ suddenly reversed course. They decided not to release the documents after all. Now, I want to be careful here. We don't know for certain that this is what happened. That's exactly why the FOIA case exists, to get the emails, the directives, the internal communications that would show what really went on behind closed doors. But the fact that a federal judge has ordered this to be processed on an expedited basis, that tells you something. That tells you there's enough smoke here that the court wants to see if there's fire. And if the documents show what people suspect they might show, that Bondi buried Epstein evidence to protect Trump, then we're in completely new territory. We're talking about the Attorney General committing obstruction of justice to cover up the president's connection to a notorious pedophile. That's not a scandal. That's a crime. That's the kind of thing that sends people to prison. The FOIA request specifically asks for communications that might show whether Bondi misled the public. Remember, she apparently said at some point that there was an Epstein client list ready to go. She suggested transparency was coming, and then nothing. Silence, no release, no client list, just more secrecy. The question is why? Was it because of what was in those files? Was it because powerful people, maybe including the president, would be implicated? And did Bondi make the decision to hide this information based on political considerations rather than legal ones? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, she's in deep trouble. Now let's talk about the other bombshell, the dismissal of the cases against Comey and Letitia James, because this one exposes a different kind of problem with how Bondi is running the DOJ. Everyone knew that Trump wanted revenge on these two. He's been talking about it for years. Comey, the guy who investigated Russian interference and refused to pledge loyalty to Trump. Letitia James, the woman who has been systematically exposing fraud in Trump's business empire. These are two of Trump's biggest enemies. And as soon as Trump got back into office, his DOJ went after them hard, criminal indictments, the whole 9 yards. It looked like Trump was finally getting his retribution. But Judge Curry looked at how these indictments were obtained, and she found something deeply disturbing. The prosecutor who brought these cases, Lindsay Halligan, was illegally appointed. She didn't have the proper authorization to be doing what she was doing, and the DOJ tried to fix this problem after the fact by ratifying her appointment retroactively, basically saying, okay, she wasn't properly appointed at the time, but we're appointing her now, so everything she did before is fine. The judge said absolutely not. She called this approach dangerous. She said if you allow this kind of retroactive ratification, you're essentially saying that any private citizen could be deputized after the fact to secure indictments against anyone. That destroys the entire concept of legal process. That makes the DOJ into a weapon that can be pointed at anyone the president doesn't like, with no accountability and no proper procedure. And that's exactly what Bondi's DOJ was doing. They were using improperly appointed prosecutors to go after Trump's enemies. And when they got caught, they tried to paper over it with legal technicalities. The judge wasn't having it. She dismissed both cases. Comey walks free. Letitia James walks free. And Bondi is left looking like she tried to run a political prosecution machine and got caught. Now here's where it gets really serious. These aren't just embarrassing defeats for Bondi. These rulings create a foundation for much bigger problems. Legal analysts and institutional watchdogs are now talking about contempt findings. They're talking about ethics referrals. They're talking about potential obstruction investigations. Because here's the thing. When you combine the Epstein cover-up allegations with the illegal prosecution of political enemies, you start to see a pattern of lawlessness at the highest levels of the DOJ. This isn't one bad decision. This isn't one mistake. This is a systematic abuse of power. And federal judges are documenting it in their rulings. They're creating an official record of what Bondi's DOJ has been doing, and that record could become the basis for criminal charges. Think about it. If it turns out that Bondi removed or buried evidence related to Epstein, that's obstruction. If it turns out she knew that Halligan was illegally appointed and proceeded with the prosecutions anyway, that's abuse of power. If it turns out she made these decisions at Trump's direction to protect him personally, that's conspiracy. Any one of these things could be enough to put her in prison. All of them together, that's a career-ending, freedom-ending situation, and the judges aren't backing down. Judge Chutkan has been a thorn in Trump's side for years. She was the judge overseeing his January 6th case before he got reelected. She's not afraid to take on powerful people, and Judge Curry just demonstrated that she's willing to throw out cases that were improperly brought, no matter how politically connected the defendant might be. These judges are positioning themselves as the last line of defense against the DOJ that has gone off the rails. They're saying, no, you don't get to hide evidence. No, you don't get to use illegally appointed prosecutors. No, you don't get to turn the Justice Department into a revenge operation for the president. There are rules, there are limits, and if you break them, there will be consequences. So what happens next? The FOIA case is going to move forward on an expedited basis. We're going to learn a lot more about what Bondi knew about the Epstein files and why the DOJ reversed course on releasing them. If those documents show what critics suspect, that the decision was made to protect Trump, then all bets are off. The pressure for a special counsel, the calls for Bondi's resignation, maybe even criminal referrals. It's all on the table. Pam Bondi walked into the Attorney General's office thinking she was untouchable. She's finding out that nobody is untouchable when federal judges start asking questions. All right, so let's break this down into clear points because there's a lot happening and I want to make sure everyone understands why this matters. Point number 1, Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered expedited processing of records about how Bondi handled the Epstein files. This is huge. The judge isn't just letting this sit in some bureaucratic queue for months or years. She's saying, no, we need to see these documents now. There's too much public concern. There are too many questions about whether the DOJ reversed course on releasing Epstein materials because Trump's name was in there. And the only way to answer those questions is to see the internal communications, the emails, the directives, the memos, whatever was being said behind closed doors when the decision was made to keep these files secret. If those documents show that Bondi made the call to protect Trump, if they show that political considerations trump transparency and the public interest, then she's looking at obstruction of justice charges. And obstruction of justice is a serious federal crime. People go to prison for that. Attorneys general are not immune. Nobody is immune when there is evidence of deliberate cover-ups. Point number 2, A federal judge ruled that the prosecutor who indicted Comey and Letitia James was illegally appointed. I cannot stress enough how damning this is. The DOJ under Bondi used a prosecutor who did not have proper legal authority to bring these cases. And when they got caught, they tried to fix it retroactively. They tried to ratify the appointment after the fact and pretend everything was fine. The judge said no. She said this approach would be dangerous. She said it would essentially allow any private citizen to be deputized after the fact to secure indictments. That's not how the legal system is supposed to work. That's not due process. That's political prosecution, wearing a thin disguise of legality. And the judge saw right through it. Both cases dismissed. Comey walks. Letitia James walks. And Bondi is left holding the bag for running what amounts to an illegal prosecution operation. Point number 3. These rulings are creating a foundation for much bigger legal problems. Legal analysts and watchdog groups are connecting the dots. They're seeing a pattern of lawlessness at the DOJ. The Epstein cover-up allegations, the illegal prosecutions, the secrecy, the obstruction, it all adds up to something that looks a lot like systematic abuse of power. And here's the thing, when federal judges document this kind of behavior in their rulings, they're creating an official record. That record can be used by Congress in oversight hearings. It can be used by ethics boards considering referrals. It can be used by prosecutors if and when criminal charges are brought. Every time a judge says, this was illegal, this was improper, this raises serious concerns about obstruction. That's another brick in the wall of evidence against Bondi, and the wall is getting higher every day. Point number 4, these judges are positioning themselves as the last line of defense against a DOJ that has lost its way. Think about what's happening here. The Department of Justice, the institution that is supposed to uphold the rule of law in America, is being run by someone who may have broken the law herself. The person in charge of prosecuting crimes may have committed crimes, and the only thing standing between this administration and complete lawlessness is a handful of federal judges who are willing to say, no, this isn't right, and we're going to stop it. Judge Chutkan ordering expedited processing, Judge Curry dismissing illegally obtained indictments. These aren't just procedural decisions, these are acts of judicial resistance against an executive branch that seems to think it's above the law, and right now, in this moment, these judges are the only thing preventing what could become a full-blown constitutional crisis. So what does all this mean going forward? It means Pam Bondi is in a very precarious position. She's got the Epstein FOIA case moving forward quickly. Those documents could be devastating if they show what critics suspect. She's got the embarrassment of having 2 high-profile political prosecutions thrown out because her DOJ used an illegally appointed prosecutor. She's got legal analysts openly discussing contempt findings and obstruction investigations. And she's got federal judges putting all of this on the record, creating documentation that could be used against her if the political winds shift, or if a future administration decides to hold her accountable. Prison isn't confirmed. Let me be clear about that. Nobody has charged Bondi with anything yet, but prison is absolutely on the table in a way it wasn't before these rulings came down, because now we have federal judges explicitly raising concerns about obstruction. Now we have official court orders demanding answers about potential cover-ups. Now we have dismissed cases that expose illegal conduct within the DOJ itself. The legal exposure is real, the risk is real, and Bondi knows it. This is what accountability looks like when the normal mechanisms fail. Congress isn't holding oversight hearings that matter. The White House is actively protecting Bondi. The DOJ obviously isn't going to investigate itself. So the courts are stepping in. The judges are saying, fine, if nobody else is going to enforce the rules, we will. And they're doing it one ruling at a time, one order at a time, building a case in public view that shows exactly how this Attorney General has abused her power. Whether that ultimately leads to criminal charges depends on a lot of factors. It depends on what the Epstein documents show. It depends on whether Congress gets serious about oversight. It depends on whether there's ever an administration willing to prosecute former officials for their conduct. But the foundation is being laid right now. The evidence is being preserved right now. And Pam Bondi should be very, very worried about what happens when all of this finally catches up with her. All right, that's the story. Pam Bondi is trapped. Federal judges are exposing evidence, removal, and illegal prosecutions. The Epstein file situation is getting expedited review. The Comey and Letitia James cases got thrown out because her DOJ used an illegally appointed prosecutor. Legal experts are talking about obstruction and abuse of power. And prison, while not confirmed, is now absolutely on the table for the Attorney General of the United States. This is historic. This is unprecedented. And this is happening right now. Hit that subscribe button if you want to stay on top of this story, because it's moving fast. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Is Bondi going to get away with this, or are the walls finally closing in? and I'll see you in the next one. Because trust me, with everything happening in Washington right now, there's always going to be a next one. Always.